This is Notes from the Underground, and it is a talk about geophytes. And geophytes, stole another thing. This is from, I think, Wikipedia. It's a perennial plant for the potato or daffodil, which in spring propagates from an underground organ, such as a bulb, a tuber, a corm, or a rhizome. And we'll actually look at all four of those as we go through these, although very little at rhizomes, but quite a bit at most of the others. So this is really a talk about onions and potatoes. So it's things that you're familiar with, at least on the large scale. You can eat both of these, but most of the other things I show you would only get to eat once, because you'd be dead. Why be a geophyte? When you're dormant and herbivores are looking for something to eat, a lot of these are desert plants or alpine plants where there are lots of things looking for things, and they can't get to you because you're hidden. Also, really important is the underground temperature. If you go a couple inches below the surface, say 4 or 5 inches, the temperature is very, very stable. It changes by just a few degrees over the whole year. The Earth's surface moves very, very slowly. The other thing is subsurface moisture is much more constant. It takes a long time for the subsurface to dry out, and there's always water moving around from underground streams and underground sources. So the subsurface moisture is much, much more constant, and that makes it much, much easier for things to stay alive. So we're going to look now at different kinds of geophytes. We're going to start off with bulbs, which are most familiar, and then we'll go on to some other things, and we're going to end up talking a little bit about cultivation at the very end. Some of these things are going to be really, really common. Some of these things are fairly obscure, but it's good to take a look at both. So we're going to start off in the amaryllis family, which is one of my favorite families. And this is Amaryllis belladonna. And this is actually a cultivar produced in California by in 1990s or so, 1980s, probably before there. This is Amaryllis belladonna. It's a cultivar. It's a beautiful plant, easy to grow. You just dig a hole, stick these in the ground, and walk away. They don't want any water. They don't want to be disturbed. They just want to be left alone. They'll leaf out when the rains come, and then they dry up, and they'll flower again in August or September. This is another one, another beautiful one. It's Amaryllis belladonna. This is one of the California cultivars. People have been cultivating these and selecting cultivars for hundreds of years. And there's a wealth of really spectacular ones. This is one of my favorites. So also in the family is hippeastrum. You probably know this is better as amaryllis because that's what they're sold at Christmas. This is a bulb called Ludwig's Dazzler, beautiful plant. I wanted to show the bulb a little bit too. What you see, the wrinkly part on the top is basically last year's old skin that's dried out pretty much. Right in dead center, you can see this white little spot, and that's actually a little bit of fungus. It comes and goes. It doesn't do any harm. The bulb just lops that off in time. And these, of course, you buy them at Christmas. They flower at Christmas. But if you keep them for a while, within 2 or 3 years, you'll find out they're actually flowering in early spring, which is about the time they would normally flower in habitat. This is Hippeastrum minerva. Bought at Home Depot. It's the most common one for Christmas. Easily grown, really spectacular flower. Interesting thing about this flower is the green center. In the 1950s, 60s, early 70s, any flower with a green center would have been discarded as being not worth keeping. When you get to the current times, people are looking and growing them specifically for green centers. So it's just one of these fads that comes and goes. Right now, it's in, and we're lucky to have this plant around. This is Hippeastrum minerva. I just showed you the flower. This is the bulb. That bulb's about 4 inches across or so, and it's typical of what you would find if you went to if you went to Home Depot right about now. You'll find these around. Worth getting, worth growing. Nothing could be easier, really. They don't start putting roots out until the leaves start. So the leaves are going to come out in early winter, late winter, early winter, maybe even late spring. And that's when the roots will start to grow. And so you can do whatever you want with it until then. Southern California was actually one of the centers of hippeastrum breeding in the 1960s and before the 1950s. And there were several people who went to Bolivia and Brazil and collected plants, brought them back, and then hybridized them. One of these was Fred Meyer, who lived around here. And this is one of his. This is Hippeastrum La Paz. Beautiful plant. You can buy this at many online nurseries. It's not difficult to grow. It's one of the cybistiforms, which has these very thin petals. A great, great plant. This is a more modern cultivar. This is Hippeastrum saffron. I have probably a dozen or more of these different kinds of Hippeastrum, and they're all great, and they all bloom in late spring. And there's a Southern California Humericalis and Amaryllis Society, which actually has a big show, generally in April. We'll see what we manage to do this year. Samantayana, another one. I believe this is a Japanese clone, but I'm not 100% sure. But it's a lot of the really interesting work for new hybrids is coming out of Japan. But we also have great species, and this is Hippeastrum parodii, and this is what a species looks like. Much, much longer. The flowers are much smaller. Green center, again, as you can see, a much darker green center, and a beautiful, beautiful plant. And this is Hippeastrum blasfeldiana, and this has been used in many of the commercial hybrids. And most of those now, I have 7 or 8 generations in there, so you can't tell what's in there anymore, but certainly blasfeldiana is in there for both the stripes and the color and the green center as well. Well, there is something from Mexico, which is a Spercalia formosissima. And this is in the Hippia or the Amaryllis family as well. And there's a couple of bulbs that I took a picture of. And this is what the flower is. So oddly enough, this plant, even though it's thousands of miles away from Hippeastrum, will actually hybridize with them. So we're going to move over to South Africa. We're going to be jumping continents all through this talk. This is Narine humilis, subspecies tubalgensis, or variety tubalgensis. And these are what the bulbs look like. These are full-grown bulbs ready to flower. And you can see they're about the size of a quarter. And this is what the flower looks like. I love Narines. There are many, many different kinds, many great hybrids. This is another one. This is humilis, straight humilis. You can see the petals are straight with just really wavy little edges on the end. A great species. And then the other hand, this is undulato, and it's my favorite of all of them. The species is the petals look fantastic. They're very acrobatic plants, also very easy to grow. I grow them in pumice, and they do just fine. I fertilize them very frequently. And you can see, particularly to the right of center, 2 green balls. Those are seeds forming already. That flower has been pollinated, and it's already starting to set seed. There are lots of cultivars around. This is a cultivar called Baby Doll. I believe it came from Holland, but I really don't know. It's just one of those things that I actually picked up at Home Depot or Lowe's or someplace like that. And another hybrid, this is from Charles Hardman, who was a great bulb grower in Baldwin Park, and one of the people who taught me a lot about growing bulbs. He passed away about 5 or 6 years ago. But this is one of his hybrids, and he used a team of trained hummingbirds to do all his pollination, and then did careful selection of really nice ones. He never named this one. And another hybrid, also from his collection, a really beautiful plant. These are all easy to grow. They're all flowering about now. Some of them are just finishing. Some are in full bloom. Some of them have yet to start. The species ones will be a little bit later. The hybrids are pretty much largely done at this point. So this is another African plant. This is Gethylus brittanae. You can see this is a full-grown bulb. It's actually 2 years old, and in another 4 or 5 years, if it doesn't rot, it would be twice that size. But mostly it's likely to rot. They're tough to grow outside habitat, but you can occasionally get them to grow. And this is a species from the Namaqualand, and you can see what it looks like. Oddly enough, if you go to the Namaqualand, you'll find them every place. They're growing in the hills, they're growing in flat areas. They don't seem to mind anything at all. Very easy to grow in all sorts of environments. And here you see the flower. Interesting, the flower is very, very low to the ground. It actually sets seed right at ground level or sometimes even below. And then they blow around and propagate themselves in the Namaqualand. This is Cactus falcatus, really a nice plant. easily grown as well. Grows it in pumice. I grow it in pumice and just give it lots of food. The flowers are about 4 inches long, so it's quite a spectacular display, typically in winter. This is Euchrosia. For those of you who remember Bill Baker, this is one of his plants, and it's unnamed species, or we don't know what the name is in any case, from Peru. Can't find pictures of it anyplace else either. Very, very long stamens, and a nice plant. It's rare to see it with any pollen on because the bees are around it right away. Another one, Euchrosia bicolor. Now, we don't see these very often, but they're not difficult to grow. And there are nurseries that sell these, and several of us will grow these and bring them to shows and sell them there. And they're great plants and not at all difficult. Phaedraciv, another interesting species. Those flowers are about 2.5, 3 inches long, pollinated by hummingbirds for the most part, and lots of pollen, and easy to grow. This offsets so much as to be almost a pest. Nothing is easier to grow than these. So back to Africa again. This is Brunsvigia radiculosa. This was taken in South Africa, just on the border of Lesotho, and at about 9,000 feet. So it can take snow. It gets snows up here all winter long. It's a ski resort not that far away. There's a whole field of these. Every single one is slightly different color, with all shades of pink to almost red. And Boaphene distica. That's the flower up on the right. And it flowers in August from a bare bulb with no leaves at all. And right on the left is what the leaves look like right about now when it's in full leaf. And it will be in full leaf until the weather gets hot in June or so. And it wants lots of food and has lots of seeds if you do it right. And especially if you have 2 or 3 of them at once, because it really wants to have cross-pollination between different clones. Great plant, easy to grow. So here we are now in Spain and Portugal and places like that. This is Narcissus viridiflorus. This flower is about 1/2 inch from tip to tip. It's a small plant. But if you look at this, you see what really, narcissus and daffodils are the same. And you can see that little cone in the center. And this, you can sort of convince yourself that this actually is a narcissus. And here's a narcissus, a double narcissus. And another one with split coronas. These are the ones I like most. Really interesting plants with big wide coronas that separate over. That would normally be a cone around the center, just as we saw in the species. So now we're going to move on to the hyacinth family, which is probably my favorite family, because it has some of the most bizarre members of the bulb family. So we know what hyacinths are because we see them at Christmas and we see them all over the place, and they're mostly fragrant. This is a well-known cultivar called Hyacinth Carnegie. They've been hybridized for hundreds of years, going back to Roman times, actually. And people have been selecting cultivars, and certainly in the 19th century, there was a wealth of them made all the way into the middle of the 20th century. It's sort of a little bit out of fashion now. You don't see many new cultivars coming out, but there used to be sometimes in the early 20th century, you would have 20 or 30 or 40 different new cultivars coming out every year. Most of these lost, but some of them still around. One thing about the hyacinths, there is a nursery in Michigan called Old House Nursery, and they go into collections of old hyacinths, bring them back in the catalog for a year or two, let them go, and then bring back something else again every few years. It's really quite an endeavor and quite nice to have that available again. Plants that nobody's really seen since for 80 or 90 years suddenly appearing in a catalog. This is Beltamia bracteata, that is about 4 or 5 inches across. Big leaves, big strong leaves, gigantic roots. It grows in a big pot or grows in the ground. It does very well in California in the ground. This is what the flower looks like. Mine are not setting buds yet, but the leaves are out and they're growing. And they're wonderful plants. Same thing in 19th century, particularly in England. These were selected for different color cultivars. And up until World War I, there were dozens and dozens of cultivars, but they needed a hothouse growth in England. And when World War I came, they couldn't afford to keep the hothouses hot enough, and they lost almost all of them. And it's really in the 1980s that people started bringing them back. And now we have things like Beltania yellow flame that are generally readily available. And once again, people are doing all sorts of slight variations of color and shape, and there's wonderful things appearing. So this is ornithogalums. I think we all think we know what they are, but this is Ornithogalum comptoni. It's a tiny plant again. This is a full-size plant, dormant when I took this picture, but you can see the bulb is less than that of a penny. And then this is Lachenelia. I had this, actually received this as an ornithogalum, but recently realized that it was actually a polyzena and now moved into Lachenelia. This is a plant I got from Charles Hardman, and it's actually located on top of a mountain in Hammondsburg. This is Lachenelia. I like Lachenelia, so you'll probably see more than you need to. You can see the bulbs. The bulbs are typically half-inch or so in diameter. Fantastic flowers that come up. This is Lachenelia viridiflora. I can't propagate this quick enough to give all the people who want some plants, but it's a great plant. Great leaves, easy to grow, propagates fast, offsets like mad, sets seed, everything you could ask from a bulb. Latimeriae, I think I showed this already. Neopattersonia utenhageni. Another really nice bulb. The bulb is about 3/4 of an inch tall during the roots, but it has all these really bizarre flowers that appear probably late winter, early spring. And you can see the flowers are not like anything else. The species, the whole genus has recently been moved in ornithogalum, but it's not clear that it's actually going to stay there because it's so different from all the other ornithogalums. The flowers stay horizontal. They don't go up or down as ornithogalum or albucas do. So it's a unique plant. Hausonia echinatas. This is pubescent form. And if you want to see the pubescence on the leaf on the left, you can see a little bit of white hairs. The hairs are tiny. It's sort of like peach fuzz, but even smaller. And this is a Charles Hardman collection. And I've been propagating this and making this available for years. This is an albuca species from a place called Haps River. And again, it's a small bulb. And you can see some of the bizarreness that you see in the hyacinth family. And actually, I didn't even know I had this, so I started preparing this stuff, and I was wandering around the yard looking for bulbs, and I came across this, so I'll be propagating this as quickly as I can. This is well known. This is Albuca namaquensis. I got these as seed from Silver Hill many years ago, labeled circinata, but they're now being combined into a single genus. It's very widespread in Mappo land. You'll find it all over the place. Very, very similar to spiralis. And the difference is really on some tiny hairs on the stems that are not even visible in this photograph. Here's one of the more bizarre ones. It's Drimia haworthortes. That's what the bulb looks like. All the scales are very loose, and you can see the leaves that are sort of haworthia-like coming out from the tips. The leaves will get to be about 4 inches tall. From tip to tip on the bulb itself, that'll also be about 4 inches. And it offsets. If you were to cut off any of these scales and just stick them in the soil, they'll root and produce new bulbs from there. It's a very easy to propagate member of the family. This is Dipcarii crisp. It's a photograph I took of one of the Gary James bulbs. It's something I've been trying to find for years, and I can never find it. But like many of the Dipcarii, it has brown flowers. Unusual thing for the entire genus practically to have brownish to slightly yellow flowers. This is another one, Drimia species from Uberg Pass. The bulb is about 1 inch in diameter, and it's got a flower that's a little over 1.5 inches on a long stem. And Drimiopsis maculata, this has many, many names, but this is the name I bought it under, and I'm keeping for at least now. And the bulb is about 1 inch. It is from tip to top, bottom to top. And the leaves are 4 inches or so, and it's really a very pretty one. It offsets widely as well, and you can fill any size pot you want in just a couple of years. There's lots of Trimeopsis, all with locality data, because no one's figured out whether it's a variable species or not. This is one from Norwright Hills near Johannesburg, and this is what it looks like, a single leaf. Nice little bulb underneath there. Comes up in the spring, disappears by now, and it's a great, bizarre plant to add to any collection. Lediboria leptophylla. Its bulb is about 2.5 inches across, and it's in full leaf. That's all you're going to get for the entire year. It's a great, bizarre little plant. And this is Lediboria succulent, really quite large. These grow in gallon pots at this point, and they're about 8 inches across from tip to tip, and set lots of flowers. And I've grown this for about 8 years, trying to get seed out of it. This year, I finally got the first set of seeds out of it. Getting ready. I knew it was just a day or two right before it was ready to be harvested. Something came and ate them all.
No.
Muscari paradoxum. I love muscaries. You can buy species muscari at Home Depot, and they're probably going to be true because these are so easy to propagate. This is paradoxum just coming into bud. That bud will get longer and longer. But this is what you'll get. This is leucostomum, and it's you can see this with this really beautiful white tip. These are great plants. They do well on the ground here. They do well in pots. They offset to make seeds. They do everything you could ask again for a bulb, and they're very inexpensive. Eucomis vanderwermii. This is a cultivar called octopus, but I can't see any difference between this and the species. It's a great plant, and again, flowering in August or September, and now just about ready to go dormant and wait out the winter. Schizobassis intricata. You can see this, it's in full flower, and those little white specks around there are flowers. It's in a 3.5-inch pot, and you can see maybe it's a 4-inch pot, and it spreads out to be about 6 inches across. And it comes and goes, the little things will completely dry up, and then a few weeks later it'll start to leak out again when the water and the weather are right. Easily grown, and occasionally available from the Huntington and elsewhere. The Whiteheadia bifolia is another bizarre plant in this family. That's what the flower looks like. Now, this is a collector's plant because there's no way you can say this is beautiful, but it certainly is interesting. And you can see it's setting seed pods in there, and there's open flowers at the same time. The little triangular things that look like little hats are seed pods, or will be seed pods. And you can still see the pollen all there around there. It's a bizarre little plant, but certainly for those who like bizarre things, it's an interesting plant to grow. So now we'll go on to the irid family. What we've shown so far are bulbs, both the amaryllis and the hyacinths are true bulbs. Irids are corms. So the bulbs are basically leaves that have come around and grow from leaves. Corms are essentially pieces of stem that will leaf out again, and it's basically the storage. So the Babianas are wonderful little plants. They're very small for the most part, 5 or 6 inches, maybe up to 10 at the biggest ones. They come out in the early spring and flower for the most part, very much for South Africa, like crocuses would be for people who live in the Northeast here or Europe. This is Babiana tanaquana, Babiana ambigua. I add 3 or 4 to my collection every year because these are wonderful things. But probably of the irids, my favorites at this point are Ferrarias. Every single seed-grown clone is different than every other seed-grown clone. So this is one of many Ferraria crispers I have, and you can see these things. These are all scented, and the scent varies from vanilla to rotting meat. And the interesting thing I found is you take the same plant to 2 different people, and they will tell you the scent is 2 different things. So this clone I've had being identified as vanilla and as chocolate, and I can barely smell it at all. Another Ferraria crispa See, a lot of things, these are pollinated by flies. So you can see the center looks like, and the curly spots make this look like rotting material that flies would go. The flies will lay their eggs in the center hairs of this. This is another form. It's a chocolate brown form for Herria crispus, still the same species. These are just different clones. There are many species, and this is another species, Divaricata. And I'm sure these will be just as variable if you could get enough clones going to see this. And then my current favorite, Herria densa punctillata. And this bloomed for me the first time last fall, and I was really thrilled by it. And it's offsetting nicely, so I hope to have more of these this year. This is Leporesia violaceae. So we're looking at a dime here, and we're looking at bulbs or corms that really are cones. They have a flat bottom, little few roots coming out the bottom, and then what looks like a little cone. And really, really nice flowers. These can weed around. If you grow them in pots, you'll have them in more pots than you really need. But they're not a horrible weed, and they're easily to find because nothing else looks like them, either the flowers or the corms. Morea ciliata, and you can see the corms on the right that are splitting into multiple corms, and you can see this beautiful flower on the left. And Moreas are wonderful plants, make good garden plants. Some of them can be very weedy, some of them are not. This is an unnamed species that I have. This is Tortuosa. This picture is 5 years' work. The flowers last for a single day, and they open about 9 o'clock or so in the morning, and they close up about 4 o'clock. So for many years, I would go to work knowing that it was going to open later in that day, and get home knowing that I had missed it yet again. And it took about 5 years before it actually opened up on a Saturday. That flower is about 3/4 of an inch across. Really, really nice plant. Not the easiest thing to grow, but very, very well worth the effort. This is Tritonia, another one of the irids. You can see the corms and the leaves on the right. And you can see that it's in the irid family just by looking at the leaves. And really, really interesting flowers from different Tritonias. And Ixia viridiflora. This is a sky blue picture, this plant that's almost impossible to photograph because it reflects the skylight. And if you try to shade it so you don't get skylight, it all turns white on you. But it's a great plant. Everybody who comes in the garden wants to get one. And it's fortunately very easy to propagate. It offsets a lot. Another one is Ixia odorata. Ixias also can be, some of the Ixias can be very weedy. Some of them aren't, and this is not, neither is the previous one. So from now on, we're going to go into tubers and more unusual things. So we're going to start off with the Eriospermum family. This family of plants that comes from South Africa, goes actually fairly far up into Northern Africa, and also appears in India as well. So this is Eriospermum erinum. And like many of them, it puts out a single leaf. And this is what the leaf looks like. And it all has these little bumps and strange hairs coming out of the leaf. Generally, they put out one leaf a year. Some of them put out a few. And then once in a while, it will put out, once the tubers get big enough, it'll start putting out flowers before it leaves out. This is the most famous and most desired of all, Eriospermum paradoxum. You can see the tuber at the top of the pot. The tubers want to be right at surface level, just barely buried. And then you get a stem with that substitutes for leaves, and it's about 4 or 5 inches tall. Just leafing out in October, and it will stay around until March or April. So when we get some hot weather, it'll dry up. These are some of the tubers, and you can see this is why I like geophytes and why I take pictures of the tubers. Well, actually, for several reasons. One, for a lot of these more exotic ones, I may never get to see it again because I'll rot them. But the other is to get a feel for what these things look like underground and how they grow. So what you see here are roots of dried tubers and the tubers themselves, and you plant these and just wait for the right time, and up they come. This is Eriospermum folioliferum with these strange protuberances on its single leaf. And then you can see what the flowers, it flowers before it leaves out. So at this point, I've flowered them. I've collected seed from many of them. They're self-fertile, and I'm beginning to pot them up and try to grow them on for next year. alcacorny with spider webs. And again, another really bizarre, it's a single leaf, and that's all you're going to get. So oxalis, many people think you probably already grow enough oxalis, but there are true wonders in this family. This is oxalis species, maybe Purpurea. It's a photograph I took in Namibia. I'm not sure what it is. There are other geophytes in here too that I haven't bothered to identify, but certainly it's a really nice plant. And what they should look like. This is Pez Capri in probably about a 3 foot by 3 foot batch of these that was about to get cut down. They grow very, very well in California. They're very, very weedy. They grow in every collection. You got to dig them out all the time. But they're if they were hard to grow, you would want them, but they're not. So this is what it looks like. The tuber is way below ground, so unless you dig down the 6 or 7 inches and you just yank it, you're just going to leave the tuber down there. Oxalis fabiifolia, really nice leaves on this. Oxalis perticapita, variety Malacobalolas. Really, really beautiful flowers. And the flowers are fairly large, or about 1 inch across. It's really a nice plant for any collection. And these aren't weedy, then you're not going to get them all over the place. I do, however, deadhead all of my oxalis unless I'm propagating them, just to be absolutely certain. It's a wise thing to do. Some of the Lacanias as well. This is a Michael Vassar plant. There's not many people around who still remember Michael Vassar. But this is Oxalis obtusa with one of his collection numbers. Great plant. There's a lot of plants with this collection number still around and available, especially through the Pacific Bulb Society. This is Oxalis anamala. It doesn't look at all like an oxalis. White flowers, though, will tell you right away what it is. But the stems are very long, and it's not very much like an oxalis at all. It is still South African. So as we go on, we get to other things. These are pelargoniums, and this is Pelargonium auratum. Pelargonium is divided up into a number of different subgenera. You can see the flowers with the dark purple tips. They're very small. They're half an inch at the most across. And you can see the tuber coming into leaf. Bochari, with these really cut petals and tubers. And you can just take those tubers and the long one and cut that in half. And there's a good chance both halves will root and grow again. This is Pelargonium elephia, and this shows one of the, again, it's a bizarre flower, and it's not very big flower, but it shows one of the advantages of being a geophyte. If something were to come along and decide to eat it and grab it and yank on it, the top would come off and you walk away eating it, but all those little arms on the bottom, those roots will all break off, and many of those will make new plants for the following year. So it's a way of self-propagation, self-preservation. And it's also for growers a wonderful thing. You can go in there with clippers and clip off half a dozen of those. The mother plant won't even notice, and you can propagate all of those, and most of those will grow just very easily. Species with from Wupperthal, beautiful flowers, same kind of thing. You can see the multiple bulbs, in fact, tubers there. You can cut that lower one off and put it up near the surface, and it will most likely leaf out and grow new plants as well. This is Pelargonium lobatum, really spectacular flowers, easy to grow, sets 1 million seed a year. And this is a typical tuber on the left with little small tubers coming off from the left and right, and some others on the ground. You can pull those off and propagate those as well, and it will start new plants. But these grow so fast that you don't really need to, and seed grows so fast as well. Radicifolium, similar thing, different kinds of flowers, but tubers again stacked and ready to be cut off and propagated. And same kind of thing, when something goes along and eats it, those lower tubers will stay on the ground and fall off and start new plants. So there's been some discussion between myself and some others whether cyclamen are succulents or not. So my attitude is, if you can call an Eriospermum a succulent, and we have lots of them shows, then I can call a cyclamen a succulent. And this is Cyclamen graecum, which comes from a place that has some Greece, which has weather not all that different from Southern California. It grows right now. It's leafing out. It's leafed out for the most part. It's already flowered, and will stay leafing out, growing the tuber bigger and bigger until the fall, until the spring. I mean, when it gets warm, it'll dry up, and you can sort of see some really curly things down there in between the leaves, and those are flowers that are beginning to fade and setting seed. So this is Succulent Geophytes, what the tuber looks like. It wants to be at or below the surface, depending on the species. Another clone. For people who get tired of Haworthias, you can go to Succulent because it's equal number of bizarre patterns and an equal number of aficionados who will grow this. In England, there's a big Succulent Society that is about the same size or maybe even larger than the Haworthia Society, and produces seed lists of collected and propagated seeds, and it's quite a display. This is Succulent hedifolium, and it's a hybrid of the different. They're all hedifoliums, but you can see the leaf, and you can see this really bizarre pattern. Easy to grow. Again, this comes from Crete and into northern Africa and Sicily and places like that. It's widespread, lots of forms of it, and easy to grow as well. This is Ralphianum, and it comes from Libya, and you can see the tubers are quite strong because it's split a 5-inch pot at this point. They're really impressive. They grow quite quickly if you feed them and water them, and the tubers are amazingly strong. This is what a Ralphianum leaf looks like. Beautiful, beautiful plants. And this is what the flowers of Gracum looks like. So you can find Succulent at Home Depot from now until just after Christmas. And they're Succulent as well, but they've been so extensively hybridized that they've lost a lot of their character. And basically you get pink and red flags on a tuber, and the tubers don't last. They come from Turkey and basically higher altitudes and are great for a winter here, but are hard to propagate later on. So Bobinis or bobines, depending on who told you how to pronounce it. This is Bobini species. It's Hall 501. These are tiny plants. It's 1.5 inches from the root to the top. And you can see the little tuber there. And Bobini weissei. So that tuber is about 3/4 inch across. The leaves are about 1 inch long. It's leafing out now. It'll stay leafed out through January and February. And then sometime when it even gets a little bit warm, it's not going to wait for a couple of warm days, a day or two, and it's going to say, okay, had enough of this year, and then disappear again. Bobini halii and Bobini mesembryanthioides. The texture of this plant is just like Jello. If you leave Jello in the back of the refrigerator for a couple of weeks, and then you go touch it, this plant is exactly the same. I took this picture the day I got this plant because I figured there's a good chance I'd never see it again. But in fact, it's come back for several years. Bobini phallax, another member of the family, looks quite a bit like a Haworthia and easily mistaken for one. And another one. And Bobini margarite. Again, in flower, all the Bobini flowers look exactly the same. You can see the things that, again, look very much like Haworthias, but are just above the surface for a few months a year. So the Aziaceae, or the ice plant family, lots of things there. And what we don't realize is lithops are classic geophytes. All of the plant body, other than the top surfaces below the soil, all of the branching takes place below the soil. The seeds are formed below the soil for the most part, in between the cracks on the leaves. This is a classic geophyte. And you can see a couple different species here. This is a habitat picture, I forget where. This is Lithops herrii in the Richtersveld. And you can see again it's a plant that lives all the time below the surface. And this is a plant, again, from my collection. And it's Lizii varium mariae. And you can see the stems coming down there, and you know that when it starts to offset, it's going to be offsetting from the base, not from the top. So the offsets will occur underground, and then the roots will expand to cover the different offsets. Mestoclama macrorhizum. I have this in a pot with the roots raised, but if it was left to its druthers, all of those roots would be underground, and you would see what looks like a shrub, a leafy shrub growing in on the hillsides in South Africa. And again, an easy plant to grow. I used to grow these in trash cans because they grow quick, and you want to leave room for the roots to grow quickly. Roots don't really like being above surface that much. This one is tolerated for several years. Delosperma we think is things that grow in cracks or other things, but there are several of them that have caudexes and tuberous roots, and this is one of them. You can see it's been raised a bit. You can see what looks like almost a caudex on the lower left, and the stems are coming up there. I prune this several times a year and just stick the stems in potting mix, and they often will root and make new plants that way. So I don't have much on rhizomes, but this is Fenestraria auricantha, and it's a plant that actually is some mesem that grows from rhizomes. The what look like roots that actually go from clump to clump, and this will spread out as it grows and it'll grow into a clump either way. And but it's a rhizomous mesem. This is another one, Alanopsis schunzii. It forms a nice tuberous root which can be raised and shown with a raised. The tuber will burn relatively easily, but it's evergreen and not difficult to grow at all. It's one of the easier ones to grow, even though it's one of the most spectacular species as well. So this again is a Richtersveld. This is Uophytum, and just like lithops, it's growing underground, and all the branchings are occurring below ground. So just now to look at just a few other wonders. This is Trachyandra totalis. This is a habitat, again, in Makwaland. And what looks like pieces of ribbon there are actually the leaves of this plant. It's a very, very arid and very unusual plant to see. This is Trachyandra ciliata, very rare, except in my backyard where I have way too many of them. But if you can't see very well, but the stems are very, very hairy. The hairs are too short to really see. On the one on the left, I can see near the top a few hairs, but in fact, when you touch it, it's very, very hairy. And it makes lots and lots of leaves and offsets. It's easy to grow. Avionia quinaria, this is again in the Makwaland picture, in the ground, where you can see the plant is almost entirely underground. Tsubalgi leucantha, beautiful plant. We think of Tsubalgi as plants that deer won't eat, and it's society garlic, but this is many, many species, and many of them have very, very interesting flowers. These are some tubers from one that I got. So this is the most classic and the most geophytic plant of all. This is Glavich mirabilis, growing in a dried riverbed, but there actually is a river under the surface about 30 feet down. And this is actually what you're looking at here are the tops of trees, because there is a tree trunk under here going down 30 feet to where the water is. It's a classic geophyte. Everything about this plant is underground. Crasula capensis, another geophytic plant that you don't realize is geophytes. Crasula has a number of species that are geophytic. This is probably the best known one. So does euphorbia. And of course, in the cactus family, there are a number of members as well. This is Eriocarpus retusa. You see this big tuber. You want to put these in really deep pots because you want that tuber to grow. That's where all of the storage is. And if you do that properly, you'll get something that looks like this after a few years. And these grow pretty quickly. If you put them in deep pots with fertilizer and water and treat them right, these are not slow plants at all. Othona retrofracta, it's a caudex form, but it's a geophyte that's been raised to show. Kleinia, another one from this is out of Seneca, getting further north in Africa. So it's Tanzania and places like that. And this is Ficus salinica, again raised. This is normally what you're seeing going in the horizontal part there would normally be underground. And this is a rock fig that will grow among the rocks and basically break rocks in time. And I have it in a bonsai pot here for at least for a while. Certainly I wouldn't put this in the ground because you would regret it quicker than you can imagine. This is Arum victim. There are lots of great aroids that are geophytes as well. This is Arum pictum from Corsica, and Kolakoi, something like that, from Iran or Afghanistan. Again, relatively rare. There is a nursery in Massachusetts that specializes in these, and these are periodically available. So cultivation and propagation. This is harder to talk about than many of the talks, because some of these are winter growers, and some of these are summer growers, and some of these grow in the spring, and some grow in the fall. So cultivation is a little bit more tricky. So I use a potting mix that's 80 to 90% pumice and 20 to 10% potting soil. The grain doesn't matter when you get to this level, but you stay away from a high peat content. You don't want the peat and its acidity and its unwillingness to re-wet to be part of your mix. So it's important to remember there's no place in nature as dry as a 2-inch pot. So you got to water thoroughly when they're growing. And when dormant, you still need to give them a little bit of water once every 10 days to 2 weeks, because if they were growing in habitat, they would not be growing in a place that's bone dry all the time for months at a time. There's always a little water in the soil. And you remember when you do this that you're watering the pumice, not the bulb. You want to keep the bulb dryish, but make sure that there's water in the pumice that the bulb can access. So I use, for fertilization, I use Grow More, which is 20-20-20 with micronutrients. It's not very different than Miracle Grow. And when I run out and I'm too lazy to drive down to the only place I know that sells Grow More, I'll use Miracle Grow, and I can't really tell the difference. For the winter growers, you fertilize when growth starts. You got to stop in early December. I actually have stopped already for this year for most things. You don't want things to grow when there's no light, because you get weak growth and weak plants. And in late January, when the weather's starting to warm up, the growth is starting to pick up and the sun's getting brighter, I'll fertilize again. And I'll continue then until dormancy approaches. And when I start to see leaves getting yellow edge, I stop right away. No more fertilizer after that. You don't want to force something to keep on growing, because again, the growth is weak and you could easily rot something. Summer growers, it's much easier when they're growing. When they're green, give them food. When they turn yellow, stop. Summer growers are easier in that sense. So in summary, I've just shown a small fraction of the geophytic plants. I've only covered a few of the many families with geophytes. We skipped tulips and crocus and all the wonderful North American plants as well, but I can't fit them all into a single presentation. And try a few of these, you'll find yourself addicted to the world below surface. I think we started off with potatoes and ending up with potatoes as well. So this is one of my cyclamen, and thank you all.